Welcome, everyone. I'm Paula Williams. One of the things that I like most about working with the Aircraft Acquisition and Operations Alliance, or the AAOA, is that I get to interview very interesting people in the industry. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to interview Chad Nelson, one of AAOA's early members and a highly experienced aviation transaction attorney. Chad's practice sits right at the intersection of aviation, law, finance, business, and operations. He works on aircraft finance, purchase and sale transactions, registration matters, international aircraft deals, and broader aviation-related business transactions. In other words, he spends a lot of time in the places where aircraft deals can either go smoothly or become much more complicated than anyone expected. One of the reasons we wanted to feature Chad is that aircraft transactions are rarely simple, even when they look straightforward on the surface. Buyers, sellers, lenders, brokers, management companies, tax advisors, inspectors, and other legal teams all have a role to play. And when those professionals understand each other's work, the whole process becomes faster, safer, and better for the client. And this is exactly the type of collaboration that AAOA was created to encourage, bringing together trusted professionals across the aircraft acquisition and operations ecosystem so that members and clients have access to the right expertise at the right time. In this conversation, we'll be talking with Chad about how he found his way into aviation law, what makes aircraft transactions so different from other business deals where buyers and advisors often underestimate complexity. Having the right team members matters so much. So let's dive into the conversation with Chad. Okay, so let's just start from the beginning then. How did you first become involved in aviation law, and what drew you to this crazy niche of the industry?
Well, I'd always had an interest in business work. So I looked for a firm that had some business background because that was my, stuff, economics and different things like that were the topics I hit a lot on. Although I was a political science major, that was kind of what I was more interested in, was the business side of things. I got to the firm here, and one of the needs was I had a one of my partners was doing some aircraft finance work, and it just so happened at that point in time the international market was starting to heat up and was kind of really new at the time, and so it was one of those points in one's future that the door opened and I decided to walk through it, and it's been worked out really well ever since. So
Fantastic. Sounds like a fortunate beginning.
it was. I mean, I really enjoy what I do. As a kid, I always loved airplanes, and I grew up on a ranch, so I understand just from mechanical backgrounds of a lot of stuff. I understand a lot of that, and so whenever the aircraft purchase transactions or something come along, or something complicated about the aircraft, that usually get passed on to me because I'm the mechanical guy. So
It's good to have that comfort level. So your practice covers aircraft finance, purchase and sale transactions, registration matters, and broader business transactions. How do these areas intersect in real world deals? And you can maybe tell any stories that come to mind with that.
sure. I mean, yeah, my practice has been primarily from the start was aviation finance. And as I went along, we represent basically banks, lending institutions that are maybe not regulated as a bank, leasing companies, all those types of things for years. And I started having clients that maybe were borrowers at the time, and I may have been representing the lender. And they're like, "Man, we really enjoyed working with you. Would you help us with the transaction? We're going to sell an airplane or buy an airplane." And I said, "Well, sure." So it was kind of word of mouth, or just the other side of things. Said, "Hey, you're real good to work with. Everything went really smooth." And I just kind of built a repertoire with people that I'd worked with. And so, and then another thing is I do a lot of international aircraft work. And so I have a whole network of attorneys around the world that I work with. I got guys in the BVI and the Cayman Islands, all over the place. And I started getting a lot of referrals from them because they would have their clients wanted to register an aircraft in the US. And of course, you can't do that unless you're a US citizen. So the way to deal with that is we set up trusts, an owner trust usually. There's a couple of other ways to do it, but the simplest is to set up an owner trust, have a trustee that actually meets the citizenship test for the US, own the airplane for the benefit of this foreign, basically foreign owner. They're the beneficiary of the trust. So, it just came along like that. And it seems like most of the things have just popped up from word of mouth and working with other countries and different things. I think the last time I counted, we'd done transactions in about 73 different jurisdictions. So,
Wow. So, do you have a favorite country to do business in or a favorite country to not do business in?
oh, yeah, I mean, again, just opinions. It's just
Yeah,
nothing,
of course.
negative necessarily about countries. I've always liked working with some of our neighbors, Brazil in our hemisphere. Brazil, Mexico, those are always great places to work with. European transactions are really easy to work with. I've found that transactions that deal with a lot of the African countries are a little more difficult because they're just, first of all, there isn't the infrastructure for aircraft. And, that you could take that two different ways. Well, there's not a lot of airports. Okay, well, that's fine. If there's not a lot of airports, that probably means that their registration system and stuff also doesn't get tested very often. So you try to go register, or in my case, a lot of times deregister an airplane from one of those countries. They've never done that, or they've only done that twice, in the last 6 years. So it ends up we have to kind of reinvent how they proceed and what they want to do and what documentation we're going to have because they don't have forms for it. And so I've, in many instances, written forms for different countries. Same thing. One time on a transaction, I was working with a client who first flight had an accident, and unfortunately, it was a bad accident. The airplane was destroyed. There was a critical injury, and so we had to report that. It was in a foreign country, but we needed to report that to NTSB. And so I grabbed up the NTSB website at the time, looked all over the place. There wasn't any drop down menus. There wasn't anything on how do you report the
Mm.
transaction. So in the middle of the night, I created a form for how you report a transaction because in the regs, it tells you they want to know temperature, ambient temperature, and all these different things. So I just started basically making a checklist of things and then filling in that information. And I got a call from the NTSB. Uh, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks later, and they're like, "Hey, do you mind if we use your form for reporting these?" And I'm like, "Sure." I just made it because I needed to use it. So
Nice. Well, you can never go wrong using, somebody who's done it successfully at least once.
yeah, and that's the problem with some of the, like I said, some of the countries that just don't register airplanes or don't have any, very few of them registered. It's not that we won't do transactions as countries. I love to do transactions in new countries. It's just going to be more difficult and take longer. And so we have to prep the client to understand that, this is a jurisdiction that doesn't do this very often. It's going to take longer. There's going to be spots where they ask for information that maybe isn't relevant, but we've just kind of got to go along with what they want to do here to
Yeah,
move it forward.
absolutely. That kind of feeds really nicely into the issue of underestimating complexity. Um, what are some other examples of places where buyers, sellers, or lenders underestimate the complexity of a situation they're getting into?
I mean, there's a lot of them. I think that's the first thing I usually do on a foreign transaction is I literally sit down with the client and I explain to them that, this is a lot different process than you going out and buying, a new airplane from Gulfstream or Bombardier or Textron or whoever that is, and delivering it in the U.S. We're buying, an airplane that most of the time is used from one of the countries, and if it's in Europe, it's been on the EASA system, and so when we move it over here, the first thing to think about is what's the difficulty if there is any difficulty. Most planes now are pretty convertible, but years back they weren't sometimes. But anyway, first thing to think about is what we're going to need to do, and need to get it to a maintenance facility that can change that to FAA settings instead of EASA.
Yeah.
Then we have situations to talk about of, okay, in this transactions, there's going to be import and export issues that don't really happen in your run-of-the-mill transactions in the U.S. So we have to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with, if there's lenders in the other country on the airplane, how are we going to escrow funds? What's going to be our trigger points for releasing those funds? So there's just a lot of, issues. And then I don't think I've ever had a foreign transaction where a couple of issues don't pop up just out of the woodwork all of a sudden that you never thought of. So, if it takes 2 weeks to do a deal here in the US, it's probably going to take 2 months or longer in a foreign country.
Right. What about domestically? Are there things that people underestimate in domestic transactions?
Sure, I think that there are, especially when you're talking to first-time buyers. A lot of, if we're talking wealthy individuals or even corporations, if they're a first-time buyer, it seems to them like I'm going out to buy a car,
No.
and hey, I go kick the tires a little bit, and I buy the thing and I'm happy with it, and you have to explain, no, this is a much more complicated process. We're going to have a transaction where we want to inspect this airplane because there's so many, regulatory things that need to be checked, and you need to check all these items that have time boundaries on them, or cycle boundaries on them, and you've got dates that you have to meet to get these things fixed or inspected. And so getting somebody used to that on a first time basis is always kind of fun, I think, because you kind of get to show what your value is to this transaction, and explain to them that this is just the way we do every transaction, but it's a different process than what they've seen before in most transactions that they've done for other types of items, cars or trucks or whatever it was they're buying, rail car supplies. It's just a different animal. So
Wow.
we, got to go through that every time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it's kind of fun because people who are really good at something that is difficult for other people, they often find it fun. Um, yeah.
Well, I've always, I don't know, there's probably a little bit of teacher or something somewhere deep down in me. I've never really thought about that. Maybe after retirement, I'll go do some, college work or something that, I get with a local school or something and teach a class on aircraft finance or aircraft purchase and sale transactions, because I don't think there are a lot of classes like that out there. But yeah, I always like to teach people, and I think it's pretty interesting to do that. It's always a challenge, but very interesting. So,
Absolutely. Right. And this is kind of a similar question, I guess. Any particular legal or structural mistakes that you see often in aircraft purchase and sale transactions that you
oh
think you'd advise people?
yes,
Right.
the first thing that we run into all the time is, you know, uh, guys that have flown, and with another party, or they've chartered or something like that, and now they're getting ready to buy an airplane. They've had these experiences where they talk to the guys down there, they've talked to the pilots, that are sitting having coffee, or they've talked to other buddies or something, and they've got this impression that, you can do these things. That's because the guy down there, he did it that way. Why can't I? And then you explain to him, well, I'm sorry, but the guy down there that you were talking to doesn't really know what he's talking about. Hopefully he has counsel and they helped him out and did it right. But, otherwise, he may have troubles as well. But one of the big issues from that is explaining to people that, you cannot take an aircraft, and this goes from real estate. I think people that are, have had familiarity with real estate, they think the first thing to do is set up a brand new uh, LLC, and we'll just plop the airplane in there and operate it and own it in this LLC. Well, that's not going to work with the FAA, because the FAA, in all of its wisdom, 50, 60 years ago, if not more than that, decided that they did not want an airplane, which they at the time considered a pretty dangerous machine that's flying in the air and could fall out of the air at any time and land on a bus full of, church going children or something. So, they decided that what needs to happen here is you need to have somebody who's really on the hook for the transaction. Of course, we have insurance, but they don't want a company that has no assets, that has no real business. It's just basically a empty sack at the day. So the way to do that is you sure can own your airplane in an LLC that has no other assets if you want. But you're going to have somebody operating that airplane that has a real business to operate it if we're looking at Part 91 operations. So, if they have a lot of times they think they'll just pop it in an LLC and they'll have their name, of their company, and then it'll say aviation after it or something. Well, that's all great. It can own the airplane like that, but you're going to most likely have to lease it back to your main company anyway, because you don't have anything else that has, assets that's an ongoing business, that will have business going forward and stuff as well. And so that's one of the things we a lot of times find that, well, I heard it down at the coffee shop with all the guys at the coffee shop that, at the airport there, that you can do it this way. Well, you can't. So we run into that daily. I bet I answer questions about that, at least 3 or 4 times a week. So pretty common misconception with a lot of people. And there's others like that as well. So.
Right. That kind of leads into, often partnerships are the best way to do this, maybe using a management company or somebody who already has an FAA license. Do you manage those types of relationships? And
Yeah, I've represented Part 91 operators that are management companies. One of my fellow attorneys, we've done that a lot where we have Part 135 operators.
Mhm.
Here in Wichita, I mean, the whole economy in Wichita is based on airplanes.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have Part 135 airplane, or, we have Part 135 operators, a lot of them. And, it's not just local. I mean, I do this all over the country. I've done it in other countries as well. But, you got to deal with issues if you have Part 135 outside the U.S. primarily. So, but at any rate, we do represent those people, and then a lot of times, and it's a recommendation that I make to a lot of my clients, if they really have no familiarity with, operating an aircraft, doing that kind of stuff, Part 91 isn't the easiest way to operate an airplane. It's not hands off. You got to be hands on. You got to know what's going on. You've got to, if one company owns the airplane and another company is leasing the airplane, you may have to write checks to one company and then another check to the second company. And you've got to worry about these accounting issues and all this stuff. And so a lot of guys are like, man, I don't know anything about that. I don't want to do that. How can I get away from that? Well, that's when we say, look, let's put your aircraft under management. We can do a couple of things here with a managed airplane. Your airplane will be operated by the manager under Part 135 when it can charter the airplane to third parties, thus helping you offset costs. And when you're going to operate the airplane for yourself, you can operate it under charter and not have to worry about any of the Part 91 issues, or we can do it where the management contract works both ways, where your flights are 91 and all the other parties are 135. There's a whole bunch of ways to skin the cat on that one. So
Nice. So you'd mentioned, some people kind of unfamiliar with aviation. One of the things that's very different is this is not like buying a car where you can just go do it by yourself. You need kind of a team of people.
yes,
What
that's
makes
right.
a good or ideal advisory team? If you could wave a magic wand and create the ideal team for a transaction, who would be on that
Yeah,
team?
I mean that's a great question because that's the one of the first things that you really need to talk about. You know, I'll come in here and I will do the legal work on the transaction, but the first thing I really do is sit down and say, okay, here's what we need to do. You know, you're more than likely uh, in a scenario like this, they may have pilots from in the past, or they may have maintenance people in the past, but a lot of times they don't. And so we'll be like, okay, we need to hire somebody that really knows this particular aircraft that you decided. That is, if they know what kind of airplane they want to fly. If they
Mhm.
don't know what kind of airplane they need, then it's a little bit a longer process. But again, you need somebody who can go through all the particulars with you about range of airplanes, about size, about the cost of operating it with fuel and everything. So we get somebody like that that's got the experience inspecting the airplanes, knows the particular airplane a lot, and so we're going to take it through an inspection, and that's what that part of the team's going to do. Another part of the team is, there's always things out there that are basically accounting projects. Oh man, I can have accelerated depreciation on this airplane. Okay, let's get with your accountant to see if that's really going to work for you, and it's going to be something that we like. So, we try to talk to typically with someone uh, in the company if they already have an accountant in the company that can do this by themselves. I will say most of the times the CFO or something says, "Oh hell no, I don't want to do that. That's not my bullywig. I want somebody else to do that." So, I know team members that are set up as they're just aviation accountants, and that's a great way to go because they can deal with your tax problems, your tax issues, help with structuring for tax purposes on that. I mean, I know a lot about the tax situations, but it's enough to get myself in trouble. I can point out the issues, but I like the accountant to actually, come up with the right set of rules because that's something that's always changing as well. So, a
Right.
good accountant's very important on the transaction. Uh, you know, Other things that are very important is if you don't have pilots, well, we're going to have to find somebody that locally. Is it worth hiring a management company that already has these pilots and help you get started? And if you don't want to operate Part 135, well, at least for a while, maybe we'll use this management company's help to bring in some pilots. And get you used to how to operate it. And once you've got some time behind well, sitting in the back of the plane most of the time. Most of the times the guys are
Right.
not flying it, but I do a lot of work with pilots too that are buying their airplanes. So, but again, most of the time it's a guy. He's sitting in the seat there in the back, so he's got a lot of seat time. Once he gets
Yeah.
that time, involved, then he knows, okay, I want to fly Part 91 all the time. And, I've already got a set of pilots in. So you've got a lot of things out of the way there. So it's important, I think, to introduce a management company on some of these issues if we don't already have that support internally.
Right. So the ideal team is, I think I counted four that you mentioned, or
Yeah, of course, we've got legal here. I mean, we're going to have the accountants. We're going to have at least a team member, if not, a company involved that does all the inspection work and is very familiar with the airplane to do that. And then a management company, if we're going that route, we want to get them involved at this time, especially if the airplane is going to be chartered because, to get it on a Part 135 certificate, we've got to make sure it has all the equipment necessary, that the aircraft, has the proper records from the past to show that all the equipment on the airplane is, not out of time or, past hours or what if it's new versus used. So we got to have really good records on the airplane. And, part of that is the management Part 135 team doing it. And the other part is going to be our inspectors doing a good inspection of the records as well, because, we want to look for any past things like corrosion or
Yeah.
things like, a material, accident, or the plane got struck by lightning, all these things we can work through, but, we need to know about them because you do not want to find out something like that happened to your airplane after you've bought it. You want to find out about it either before you buy it or during the process, hopefully early in the process.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to have at least those four. Sometimes there's other parties you need to involve. It just depends on the specific specifics of the transaction, because if it's a foreign one, most of the time it's a very good idea to get and a foreign counsel involved for the situations in the foreign country. We're going to have to look at tax there. We want to look at title issues there. Make sure that there aren't liens on the plane or something in the local foreign jurisdiction that we need to take off, and get removed and paid off. Things like that. So we'll add that for certain instances when we have a foreign aircraft we're buying. Same thing. We got to talk to somebody that's really good at being an import and export broker. There's a few of them that know aircraft really well, and you want one of the guys that does this every day, not somebody who's done it once. It's not the way to go, especially when we've got the situation where we've had recently where we've had tariffs changing, and I'm going to put a tariff on this. Okay, great. Well, now I'm taking it off. And you've got to deal with that. So that's where an import-export broker is very important in that situation.
Right. Smart. So kind of going off into the business side of things, anything in particular about mergers, acquisitions, and other business side transactions or business side concerns that you'd like to go into a little more detail about?
I mean, I know that's definitely in a bio that I have, and because I used to do some of that work, the mergers, acquisitions, that kinds of things, and sometimes the transaction we're working on has that going on because we also represent a lot of uh, sub-assembly manufacturers, parts manufacturers in the industry. So we do a lot of, uh, you know, one company wants to roll up and buy out three other companies, that make these certain parts or something. So we do a lot of acquisitions and mergers on that. We actually usually have one of our other attorneys work on that part of the transaction just because, one, we're usually doing something else at the same time, but that they do it every day. They do the mergers and acquisitions every day. Like I said, been involved, done all that stuff, but primarily anymore, I work specifically on the aviation side. So
Excellent. But at least you've got the teamwork that you can pull in to make that all work.
absolutely, like I said, we do, deals like that, at least 5, 6 a year where we're helping, somebody that's getting bought out or somebody that wants to buy another team member out or another competitor out in the aviation market. So it's definitely something that happens a lot in Wichita here because we've got so many, the whole city is built around the aviation community. So
Mm,
if you're building an airplane here, it's really handy to have a lot of the parts being built here too. So,
right. I'm going to digress just a second into a little bit of a story. In one thing that became much more complex than we ever thought. This is probably the simplest possible aircraft acquisition. We bought a brand new 172 and leased it back to a flight school while I was doing my flight training. And we thought this would be no big deal, because we know aviation, we bought and sold property and other things. And we thought, oh, no big deal, this will be fine. But we found out pretty quickly it's almost like getting a master's degree in uh, a whole different discipline. So I wish I'd known you, 10 years ago when we did that.
It is a different niche of the law. I mean, there aren't a lot of aviation attorneys out there, honestly. It's probably something where, practically, a lot of the aviation attorneys I know are older than I am. So a lot of them are getting, retirement age. We probably do need more of these people that do that. I have a certain subset, it seems like, of people that I see, on every transaction. I've done deals, so many deals that it's rare that I find a new attorney that I haven't worked with. Now, that not being said, that it could be one of the younger associates or something at the firm, and maybe I haven't worked with them specifically, but I've worked with their partners in the past. But it's a pretty small community, so you usually know each other and have done deals with the other attorneys on the other sides. And that changes internationally because it becomes a much bigger world when you're talking about someone on the other side of the globe there. But
Mhm.
for what I do, I usually work with the same attorneys, the same probably 30 or 40 attorneys that do this kind of work.
Right. So don't try this at home and don't try this with your regular business attorney.
No, no. I mean, most of the time, the regular business attorney the company may have, or their internal attorney, will do some, quick research and find out real quick. Gee, this isn't like real estate. This isn't where I buy something and, like I said earlier, plop it into a new LLC. This is really complicated. So,
Yeah.
that's where we get a lot of our business as well, is from other attorneys that we've worked with in some other area or something, that go, gee, I don't know anything about this. Could you guys help us? I've even had situations where a law firm, has very prestigious clients they want to keep, and they want to, have a good showing and everything. I've been the ghost in the back of some of the larger law firms a few times where, you know, the client may not see me necessarily, but I help the team there write what we need to do, get the right questions asked, and stuff like that. It's not very often, and usually when I've done that, by the second transaction, the other law firm trusts me. They know I'm not trying to steal their clients or something like that. We've got time together. We've become friends, and so the next one, they just say, "Hey, Chad, uh, we'll check in from time to time, but why don't you just handle this for us?" So, that's usually the way that works.
It's a good partnership, right? So let's turn the conversation a little bit toward AAOA. Um,
Let me
okay,
get a drink real quick.
gotcha.
A big
Mhm.
drink. I don't.
Of
That,
course.
I think this is going pretty well so far. Does it
Oh
seem like
yeah,
it is to
this
you?
is great material. I think
I
this
mean, you
is
do this all the time. I don't.
yeah,
So,
exactly. We do this a lot for a lot of our clients and things, and I think this has become one of the best forms of marketing is the interview,
yeah.
because with so much AI crap out there, real conversations are like gold, in just about
No,
any kind of
I
activity.
agree
Yeah.
with people that really know what's going on, because AI, it tricks so many people into thinking it knows what's going on and it
Mm.
doesn't.
People can smell authenticity, so it's a thing. We don't have to be glamorous. We just have to get it done, and we have to be real. So
Well,
that's
that
what
might
we do.
honestly, that might be a question we throw in there, something about AI at the end or something. How's that change?
Oh yeah, let's actually throw it in now. How do you see AI changing the legal industry, the aviation industry, and the intersection of those two?
I think from the aviation industry, as an overall picture. I think there most likely will be more automation of, putting together the airplanes, probably doing a lot of the work that's being done by hand. I think that's, unfortunate. Some people are going to lose jobs, but you know what? We're going to make new jobs for them. So hopefully we'll be able to train those, parties to do the new jobs. But I think we're going to see change there a lot. I hope that as we move forward, that our air traffic controllers get much better systems and introduce, some AI there to help the controllers just keep track of all the airplanes on the screen and stuff, and just to help out. Not that the AI is going to control it by no means, but just to help the guys that are controlling it keep track of where each airplane is and stuff. So I think that's going to change it a lot. From the legal perspective, I mean, I really see that we're probably going to have maybe not have as many uh, secretaries, legal professional, I don't know what to say there, assistants, legal assistants and stuff. We may have fewer of those. There'll still be some, but I can see that maybe condensing. But from the legal standpoint, I really don't see the lawyers going away. I mean, I don't think AI is going to think through the issues that are out there, and I don't think it's going to come up with, the original thought patterns and stuff. So, I don't know. From my standpoint, at least from now, I'm not worried about my job. I just don't see it coming there very quickly. Maybe in the future, they'll have a robot chat or something doing this, but I don't think so anytime soon.
Right. Finding the right balance between crunching the spreadsheets and actually
Yeah.
interacting with the case and making sure you got the right answer.
I think that's going to be the way it is in every industry. There'll be new automation to things, but we're
Mhm.
not going to have, complete takeovers where an industry is just completely run by AI. It's not going to happen.
Agreed. Agreed. Cool. So, as one of our first 10 members of AAOA, it's really interesting when you start an organization because it's only as valuable as the membership, is to each other. So, what interested you in being part of AAOA, and what would an ideal collaboration look like, or an ideal situation for this organization?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously part of the reason one joins an organization like this is for, somebody marketing and getting the word out there a little bit more. That's a big part of, what we all need to do, is get the word out. Second of all, I'm hoping that we get, a number of people that play into that team we were talking about earlier, an accounting firm that knows airplanes. It doesn't do any good necessarily to just have an accounting firm. We need somebody that knows airplanes and knows sales tax and IRS rules about airplanes. We need people that are, can do the inspection work on the airplanes and know when they take it to the inspection facilities what they're looking at. Because one of the biggest things when you take especially a larger airplane in for inspection, in my mind, is having somebody on the ground locally there watching the process as it happens. Because if you're representing the seller, if I'm representing the seller, I should say, um, and the seller doesn't have anybody in the ground, but the purchaser does. Well,
Mhm.
when they take things apart, the purchaser's going to have somebody saying there, well, that's probably not within tolerance or something, and that may sway things because there's always some, you know, uh, discretion in all of these types of things. So, the seller needs somebody there going, well, I don't think so or something. And I think a lot of small little deal points can go away by having, both parties there. But it's really important to have a person like that that really knows what's going on in the team. And then, hopefully we'll have people that are Part 135 certificate holders, that we can get in this team network. And, you know, if I have an issue with, or, my client that comes and we're doing the legal issues, and we need somebody on the deal team to help out with inspections. Well, I've got somebody in the network already here. So I think that's what I'm trying to get out of it. And I'm sure that's what most of our members are trying to get out of it. Just a group, a networking group that helps put together a whole team on deals. Maybe 4 or 5 of us at a time are doing a deal, because it takes that many, pieces of the puzzle. And now we have those. We have familiar people to work with.
Yeah. So it speeds things up a lot if you have people you can trust with the diversity of skills and also the diversity of geography, where you can call somebody in Florida or
Absolutely.
Dallas and work on a deal together.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really important. And it gets even more important in the foreign deals I do, to have the network of people that can do those types of things. So, um, I've got a network of not only attorneys that we do work with in most of these jurisdictions, that I've done deals in all kinds of odd places. In the Kingdom of Tonga one time, it was a pretty interesting place to do an aircraft transaction. I've done them in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, all these kinds of places that when I first started, you didn't have very many transactions, but now we have quite a lot of transactions in these types of places. But, you know, again, I think it's good to have these team members, like you said. It would take a lot less time that I have to go out and try to interview and help the client, at least help the client interview management companies or interview accounting firms or whatever. If I already know that these people know what they're doing, and I can put it together, that the team can get together a lot quicker and we can make a move. Because on transactions, I'm not only an attorney, but I like to take my hat off as an attorney and be a business guy. And time kills deals, so you
Mm,
need to act quick on a lot of these things, be able to make decisions quick, or somebody else gets that airplane, or it doesn't get sold or whatever.
mhm,
Nobody wants a purchase transaction that should have taken a week become a 4-week process. So
mm,
it's important
mhm.
to act. And that's the way I look at it. Is I'm not here to try to make the transaction at all slower or more difficult. I want to point out deal points that are problems that you need to think about. The client's ultimate judgment on risk. That's for them to think about over the evening or whatever, or maybe early the next morning, whatever they want to do. But I want to get the questions out there and get them to start thinking about them, and then I'm always happy to weigh in on my thoughts of it as well. But they need to make the ultimate decisions.
Great. So last question about the future. We've kind of talked a little bit about AI, but what are some of the other things that you see coming up on the horizon, maybe over the next, pick a time frame, 5 years, 10 years, that people should be looking at or looking into in terms of legal, aviation, intersection of the two, et cetera?
Well, I mean, at this point in time, who knows what's going to happen in the world? But
Mhm.
we're seeing at this time, tariffs became a big issue in the last year and a half, that have made transactions more difficult. And I don't mean, insurmountably difficult, although I have run into a few transactions that just couldn't happen because of the tariffs that were in place. So, you know, my hope is some of that gets settled down. If a tariff needs to be in place, I get that. Uh, I'm all about, if one country is charging a tariff, then there probably needs to be a reciprocal tariff to make things equal out there. But what I don't want is all this stuff to keep changing and moving around, and whatever the rate is needs to stay the rate. We don't want it to change in the middle of the transaction.
Mhm.
Um, Other things out there that I see in the future is just, there's going to be a lot of upgrades to airplanes themselves. We've got autopilots and things like that in airplanes right now, that the airplane can land itself if there's an emergency or something. But you know, I see a lot more of that kind of thing. I think there will be a situation, or there'll be a period of time here in the real near future where the airplane can be flown from on the ground if need be. If something happens to the pilot, there'll be a way to switch over control to somebody on the ground to help it get down safely. I think it's going to be, hopefully a lot easier for pilots to put it on autopilot, and the autopilot's smart. It knows how to steer itself around the storm coming or things like that to help make, a pilot that, has a duty time. Maybe his duty time can be extended if he's not having to, do quite so much in the cockpit all the time, because the autopilot is a smart autopilot. It's an AI type autopilot.
Mm. Well, that's a good idea. Wake somebody up if something happens, but handle this if it
Exactly.
stays within parameters.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
If you got smooth sailing in the air, then it should be pretty basic, and hopefully the pilots can get a little or some rest and not take up all their duty time.
Absolutely. All right. Is there anything I should have asked you that we haven't?
Oh, I don't know. We've talked about a
We've
lot of
covered a
things in
lot, yeah, in a
pretty
short amount of
short
time.
amount of time.
Yeah.
There's always, war stories and stuff. Love to talk about those with people, but that'd get pretty lengthy usually. So
Any favorite
it is
story you'd
nice
like
in
to
my field.
yeah.
Oh, say again. Sorry.
Oh, I just said any favorite story you'd like to share? Anything like that?
Oh, I always have some of the strangest deals I've done. I mean, at one point, the world was a little different. I remember doing a transaction for a top official in the Palestinian Authority once upon a time when the Clinton administration was out there, and that was looked at as a part of the world that we should be working on. And so one of our lenders did a deal in the Palestinian Authority. Now, that never happened these days. It's just not going to happen. But
Mhm.
other things like that. Just there's a lot of things in the background of weird places. Like I said, we've done transactions in the Kingdom of Tonga, and one really strange thing there was one attorney that knew anything about aviation on the entire island,
Oh,
and so uh, we're like, okay, well, you're going to represent the seller or the seller then, but I'm representing purchaser here. Who should we hire? And he said, me. And we're like, that's probably a conflict. And he's like, that's the only way to get things done here. I'm the only one that knows how to do that. So, we had to build a team that had both parties' main counsel involved and put this guy in more of an administrative role. So
oh,
he wasn't picking sides necessarily on the transaction, but that was pretty interesting. Hadn't had that happen before.
wow. Sounds like complex negotiation structures, to make sure everybody's interests are represented without going outside of what you could legally do. So that's crazy.
Well, I mean, other stuff that pops up is once in a while we have transactions that, things pop up in the world. I mean, I used to do a lot of work for parties that were, wealthy individuals or stuff in a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries. I did a number of deals in the Ukraine. Well, that's not going to happen anymore anytime soon because of the war going on there. I had a number of clients in Russia. Well, you're not going to do any business with anybody in Russia right now. So, the world's changed a lot. And it's always interesting to think back, 10, 12 years ago. Man, I was doing deals over there. Now I can't. So,
Right.
time flies.
It does. And everything changes. The only constant is change. So, right.
Yep, that's true.
Excellent. Well, thank you for an amazing conversation. And it sounds like, getting to know you better, is something that all of our members should be should be doing, and taking advantage of the skills and the knowledge and the experience and all of that. So I appreciate you sharing your time and sharing your knowledge with us.
Absolutely. Happy to do it anytime.